Hello Tower Gaming players, this is Evan Jarvis, also known as Gripst, and welcome to part 7 of my multi-table tournament guide, the final table. If you found yourself in a position to use the information in this video, then you've already succeeded in your MTT endeavors. You've reached the point where all the chips are now up for grabs, and the big money prizes are within reach. The tournament that was once a marathon is now more of a 400-meter dash, where if you manage to keep the right pace and make your move at the right time, you could find yourself with the title, the glory, and of course, the money. Making it to the final table is one of the best feelings in poker. For the first time in the tournament, your reads and paying attention are guaranteed to pay off. You don't have to worry about your table breaking, getting moved seats, or who the new mystery player is going to be. The final table is set. Everyone has their seat, and the only thing that will change is that some players aren't going to stick around. Now, more so than ever, your full attention is required. You're no longer playing to cash, playing to move up small pay jumps. You are playing for some serious money. The huge pay jumps are now in play, and it's your job to have solid reads on your opponents so that you can capitalize on their weaknesses. So, my first piece of advice, if you manage to make the final table, is to get rid of all distractions and get in the zone so that you can get paid. When you come into the final table as a short stack, your goal is to create a realistic picture of what sort of situation you are getting into. Sometimes being short stacked means that you need to push any two cards when it's folded to you and hope to get lucky or go out in ninth place. But sometimes the stacks and the structure are set up in such a way that you could be one of the short stacks and still have a very good chance at making the top 3 without taking a lot of risk. It's all about measuring the final table factors that are in play before deciding what sort of approach you want to take. The first thing you want to look at is how everyone's set up. Where are the big stacks? Are they close to each other, or are they well spread out? Are there going to be reship stacks in the blinds when you're in a steal position? How are you positioned relative to the other short stacks, etc.? This exercise is very important because based on how the table is set up, stack size wise, will allow you to predict the common trends that will be recurring at the final table. The big stacks are usually aggressive and will want to steal, but only if the right candidates are in the blinds. If you're on the left side of the active big stacks, wonderful. You'll have many great opportunities to rejam and chip up. If, on the other hand, you're on their right, you'll have to be more willing to take good spots when they come up because you won't run into as many profitable opportunities to choose from. Next, you want to look at the average stack to determine how much play there will be at the final table. If the average stack is 30 big blinds, then there's room for some play at the final table. And being a short stack, you would be under medium pressure to make moves early and get back in the game. If the average stack is 10 to 20 big blinds, then you're looking at a total crapshoot anyway, and playing patient is alright, since everyone will be forced into gambling, and some players might get knocked out before you. If the average stack is over 50 big blinds, then the big stacks have all the time in the world to wait around for the short stacks to get knocked out. In this case, there's no sense in getting blinded off. That's what your opponents want. You have to take a stand and get back in the game. On a similar note, you want to be aware of how quickly the blinds and antes are going to increase, both in terms of time and in terms of increments. The faster the blinds are increasing, the more of a crapshoot the final table will be, and you can expect people to be going to war. If the blinds are very long, now the other players can afford to be patient, so you must do the opposite and take your spots as they come up. If the blinds increase in very small increments, then you should be able to take the same approach as if they were long blind levels. If the jumps, however, are very big, seeing the blinds increase 50 to 70% each time they go up, again, you can assume there will be a lot more shoving and calling in the mix. Next, you want to look at everyone's desperation factor. Sure, you're coming into the final table as a short stack, but how short are you? And how short are the others? If there are multiple players with less than 8 big blinds and you have over 15, it's definitely okay to wait them out. When players are so short that a round of blinds and antes was going to cost them 30 to 50% of their stack, it's suicide for them to fold their way hoping to move up the pay jumps. The shorter the short stacks, the more worthwhile it is to avoid confrontation and guarantee yourself some increases in the pay structure. If, however, you're short stacked with 20 big blinds and the other short stacks have 15 to 25 big blinds, now everybody is not too desperate, and you really have to play poker. When players are extremely desperate and need to pick up hands, you'd usually rather let them bust out before playing a big pot unless you're a big favorite. But when everyone has a lot of room for play and the final table is very deep stacked, then you should be playing your usual game with the hopes of picking up chips without showdown to climb your way to the top half of the field. Another important thing is what place you are in specifically. If you're in last place and the next stack has 50% more chips than you or more, then you've got nothing to lose by gambling. Most players will be waiting for you to bust out, so you might as well be pushing the envelope trying to pick up pots. The odds say that you're going to be the first person knocked out anyway, as players will be targeting you, so you must fight back to try to work your way out of last place. If you're in second or third last, your decision to wait it out or play to chip up should be based on the previous factors of average stack, blind levels, desperation factor, and of course, table setup. So now that you know how to size up the table, I want to give you the criteria to make your game plan so that you can have the best chance of achieving your goal, whatever it may be. Just before I go into this, I want to make an important note. Throughout the video series, I have hammered the importance of trying to make the top 3 places because that's where all the money is. Playing with the hopes of hitting these positions gives you the best chance of reaching the final table with a decent chip stack. Sometimes, however, things don't work out as planned, and you'll reach the final table in 7th, 8th, or 9th place. In these cases, you're still at the point where the pay jumps are significant, and trying to move up rather than strictly going for first is a fully valid option. And hey, you never know when you might catch a heater that'll catapult you into the chip lead, so as long as you aren't letting yourself get too short, meaning under 8 big blinds, then playing cautious can be okay. The first consideration is how meaningful the money is. If you're at the final table of a major tournament where each pay jump is a few hundred or a few $1,000s, and you're in off a $5 satellite, by all means, play it safe. Every step you move up the pay ladder, you're picking up a ton of buy-ins for your regular limit, and all those additional buy-ins you pick up mean more tournaments you can play and more chances you can have to make another final table. The next consideration is the strength of the competition. If the table is full of extremely strong players, odds are they'll be trying to bust the short stacks, and it'll be difficult to move up the payout structure. In the case of strong final tables, you're really forced into gambling, because to compete with tough players you need some chips, and the only way to get those chips is to take big chances. By trying to steal with a short stack against strong players, you're going to find yourself getting re-raised all in a lot. You're going to have to take a stand, so in these cases, I would recommend opening a tight range, but not being willing to fold any sort of premium hand when the action gets heavy. Your chances of moving up the pay structure playing it safe are extremely low, and even if you get cooler, there's still always 5 cards that could bail you out, and you could win a big pot if you, say, run jacks into kings. The key is to not bleed chips, so that when you do go for your double up, you're looking to double up to a dangerous stack, not the stack that you just had 10 minutes ago. If the final table is full of weak players that you can steal from and re-steal from, then go for it with the small ball approach. If nobody's playing back at you, then you can chip up a lot just by picking up the pots that nobody wants. At the final table, blinds and antes are very big, and if you're able to pick up 1 or 2 pots every round, you'll find yourself in the top half of the field in no time. With weak final tables, a lot of players will be desperately trying to cash and allowing themselves to blind off to under 5 big blinds. And when I say trying to cash, I mean trying to move up the payout structure to get a bit more cash. This is why it's important to pick up the occasional pot here and there. If you can stay steady, while everyone else gets short, eventually they're going to have to gamble, and you can find yourself 6 or 7-handed rather quickly with some more guaranteed money in your pocket. Since you will be paying close attention to everyone at the final table, you should notice who is playing aggressively going for the win and who is playing to move up. As a medium or short stack, you want to pick on the players who are trying to move up, as they're extremely unlikely to play back at you with all but the most premium hands. You should be able to steal very easily from them, and if you notice an aggressive player is going after their blinds, re-stealing will also be quite effective. The only important thing to note when planning re-steals at the final table is how many chips the raiser has compared to you. If it's a very big stack opening and you have only about 10% of their chips, a lot of the time they're going to look you up light because you can't hurt them much and the big stacks love to bust the shorties. So when planning a big re-steal, try to have at least 20 to 30% of the raiser's chip stack, so that him calling and losing means he's taken a big dent to his stack. If him calling you off and losing means dropping from first to fourth place in the field, your fold equity will be much higher, and so in turn will be your success rate, than if your push would only cost him, 10% of his chips and his place in the field would remain the same. Next, you want to look at where the action is coming from, which will be highly dependent on how the stacks are set up at the final table. If you notice the same people are always stealing from the same opponents, these are spots you want to capitalize on and make your move. Players will keep doing something until it stops working, so pay attention to what action seems to happen over and over to determine when to make your move, regardless of your holding. Also, if the action is happening behind you and is fast and furious, feel free to sit back. If half the table is playing like complete psychos, big confrontations are bound to occur. And any time that there's an all-in that you're not involved in, your equity is going up. Because whether one guy gets knocked out and you get moved up the payout structure, cool, or someone could get a lot of chips and have the other player left short stack, which also increases your chances of not being the next person out. If players are willing to bust each other without worrying about waiting for the short stack, then there's no need to feel any pressure. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show while getting paid to do it. Finally, you have to decide if you want to play it safe or go for the win. If the payouts from 4th to 9th aren't significant for you, then take your chances and go for it. Anytime a plus EV spot comes up to shove all in or reshove all in, take it. If you get lucky and manage to get a decent sized stack, then you can begin bullying. If, however, you would prefer to play it safe, only take the plus EV spots that come up when A, there are no super short stacks remaining, so it doesn't make sense for you to wait for a better spot, or B, you are getting so short stacked that if you pass on this spot, you will find yourself with little flexibility or no fold equity. How to play the final table really comes down to personal preference and experience. If it is your first time at the final table and you're one of the short stacks but not in last place, I'd recommend erring on the side of caution. You can make a lot of money just by hanging around and moving up a couple of spots once you make it to the final table. And once you get more experience and have more final tables under your belt, you should be more comfortable with taking chances, even if it means potentially going out in 8th or 9th place. I've won a lot of tournaments where I was in last or second last the entire final table, but by picking spots to make my move where it was very unlikely I was going to get called, I was able to maintain my stack and still be in contention when I finally caught my big heater and moved my way to the top of the leaderboard. Now let's look at the more fun way of playing final tables, playing as the big stack. As a big stack, you still need to size up the final table to determine where your best spots to pick up chips will present themselves. Go through the same checklist that was presented on the previous slide and make notes of who are the aggressive players and who are the passive players. You should be familiar with how to attack both player types by using your arsenal of weapons from parts 5 and 6 of the series. As the big stack, you have a lot more flexibility in how you want to play the final table. If you are the chip leader with over 80 big blinds, you have all the time in the world. You can sit around and let short stacks bust each other. You can apply the pressure to the smaller stacks, or you can target the other big stacks with the hopes of acquiring a super stack, which is more than double the second place stack. The beauty of being the chip leader is that nobody can bust you on a single hand, but you can bust them, which means that for the most part, your opponents have no choice but to fear you. Fearless players who play to win will be willing to butt heads with you. But in most tournaments where the final table isn't comprised entirely of professional MTT players, these fearless players will be few and far between. There are two options to playing a big stack at the final table. The first is a more conservative approach, which allows you to sit on your chips and ensure that you will still be in contention when the table gets shorthanded. The other is to be the table captain and steamroll the competition. Using this style, you ensure that if you're still in the tournament, you will be top 2 in chips, meaning you'll always be the favorite to take first place. It definitely means taking a lot of risk, but with bigger risk comes greater reward. So let's look at how to approach the final table if your goal is to get paid and simply make it to the top 3 spots before you start gambling. Do not, I repeat, do not get involved with the other big stacks. If someone can take a half to 2/3 of your chips, you really want to stay out of their way. Your goal is to sit on your chip lead and pick on the weak players who will allow you to run them over. As soon as you drop from the top 3 in chips to the middle of the pack, you become much less intimidating and lose a lot of your flexibility. So let's say, for example, a tight big stack raises early position, and you have tens, jacks, or ace queen in position. It's okay to go ahead and just fold the hand. Your game plan is to only battle the big stacks with the absolute nuts, and marginal spots should be avoided against the other big stacks at all costs. To maintain your chip lead without big confrontation, you want to take the small ball approach to the final table. Try to steal the blinds when weak and tight players are in the big blinds, and there are no aggressive players in position. Stealing from medium stacks is fine as well, so long as they have shown that they're not interested in playing an aggressive game at this point in the tournament. Remember, if you're only raising 2.5 times the big blind, so long as you're successful 50% of the time, you'll still be accumulating some chips. If you are diligent and only pick spots where you are unlikely to get played back at, you should enjoy a success rate on your steal attempts of much more than 50%. One thing to avoid as well is the courtesy double up. While it's important to pick on the short stacks, the last place guy is someone you don't want to pick on. The player in last place has nothing to lose by gambling and will be more willing than anyone else to move in over your steal attempts. There's nothing worse than trying to make a steal with crap and being priced in to double up one of the desperate stacks on the table, bringing them back into contention. If you notice that someone is ready to put it all on the line, tighten up your opening range and only open hands that you would be happy to gamble with if the player moved in. A range of 7s plus, king queen plus, and ace 10 plus is pretty standard in this sort of situation. Building on this some more, you really want to put the pressure on the players in the middle of the pack. These players are often waiting for the short stacks to bust and will therefore not be very inclined to play back at you. You should be able to hammer on the medium stacks pretty mercilessly and expect them to let you run them over. As soon as one of them shows that they are willing to play back, leave them be and focus on the other medium stacks at the table. Another great thing about medium stacks is that they'll be trying to steal the blinds as well, but be very unwilling to commit all their chips. This creates an extremely profitable opportunity for a big stack, as you can re-steal from the medium stack thieves relentlessly, because to play back at you they have to risk their entire tournament, and they have no way of knowing if your re-stealing is a bluff or if you actually have a big hand that is planning to call off if they 4-bet you. By using these small ball methods, you should be able to at least maintain your stack while the other players get knocked out, and your guaranteed payout will increase. This style of avoiding the other players who can hurt you ensures that you will never lose a big portion of your chips unless you get extremely unlucky, and therefore can sit pretty comfortable until the final table becomes shorthanded. Now for the gamblers, psychos, and just downright winners out there, I bring you the strategy of playing for the title. If you want to win the tournament and no other place would be satisfying for you, then you have to be willing to go all in. And you have to accept that some of the time you're going to blow your big stack and finish in the bottom 3 places of the final table. This is just the nature of going balls to the wall. The first thing you have to do is ramp up the aggression and instill fear in your opponents. If your opponents see that you're willing to go all in over 3 bets and 4 bets, and that you're willing to put them to the test when they get in your way, there's a very good chance that they are going to do exactly what you want and stay out of your way, allowing you to steamroll the final table. If you are one of the chip leaders, you want to be using your arsenal of weapons to the maximum. This means stealing in every good steal spot, re-raising a lot of the time when people try to steal, and moving in on players who try to slow down your stealing ways by 3-betting you. The first benefit to this, of course, is that you will create fear equity, and nobody will want to get in your way. They may be happy to let you pick up the chips and bust all the other players because it will guarantee that they get 2nd or 3rd place for a big payout. The other benefit to this is that if you are playing very aggressively and forcing players to play big pots anytime they put chips in the pot, you are setting yourself up to win a very big pot in one of 2 ways. First, they could just get sick of you, thinking you always have cock soup, and make a play when you're actually holding the nuts, allowing you to snap them off for a huge pot. Or you may run into a big hand when you pull the all-in trigger, but suck out for a quarter, a third, or even half of the chips in play. Some players have the attitude that you're going to have to get lucky anyway, so why not make sure that you're trying to get lucky for a monster pot, which will make the remainder of the final table a cakewalk. There's nothing like having a super stack when everyone else in the field is playing to move up the pay structure. When you're playing to win, you want the final table to get shorthanded as quickly as possible. Having the chips in a shorthanded setting is infinitely more valuable than having the chips in a full ring setting because players have to play so many more pots, there are way fewer premium hands, and thus you have many more opportunities to apply the pressure and a much lower likelihood of running into the goods. This means that while you are stealing relentlessly, if a short stacker moves all in, you can call him with a wide range of hands just hoping to get lucky and knock him out. As long as the odds are close, say even money when you have a hand that expects to have 40% equity, then go for it. You don't want to make horrible calls, but given that you'll be picking up so many chips through stealing, you can afford to gamble with the short stacks. And even if they double up, then they'll go right back into weak type mode again, allowing you to steal all those chips back that they just won by gambling with you. If you get lucky and win the flip, you'll pick up a lot of useful chips and your edge will increase due to the shorthandedness of the table. One more benefit is that if your opponents see that you're willing to call off with anything, they aren't going to want to 3-bet bluff you for their entire stack because they know it means risking their tournament. I mentioned this earlier and I'll go into a bit more detail about it now. When you have the chip lead and you can bust anyone, you can put them in a world of hurt. When you put a medium stack or a big stack all in and there are lots of short stacks remaining, odds are they're going to be very unwilling to call off with even strong hands because they can probably find a better spot. A lot of players will try to play back at you with re-raises because they know you're re-stealing and stealing, but when you put them all in for 30 or 40 big blinds, suddenly their pair of tens or ace-queen doesn't look like such a monster anymore. All they have to do is fold and let some more people bust and they're going to make some more money. And even when you get called and lose, you'll still have chips and a chance at winning the tournament. You can't get knocked out in any single hand. So being an aggressive, intimidating chip leader gives you a ton of leverage. One cool thing to note is that even if your opponents wake up with a big pair and 3-bet you, and you decide you want to force them to play a huge pot by 4-betting with nothing but ace rag, you're still going to grab him 1 out of 3 times when he calls for a monster pot. This means he has to forfeit his shot at moving up the money and winning. And the alternative is if you ship it in and you lose, you're still in the tournament once again. Not to mention that when you pull off a successful 4-bet bluff and get your opponent to fold, you're adding 10 to 15 big blinds to your stack. Some other situations, overcards against medium pairs are 50-50 when called. Not to mention all the times that you successfully make them fold. And medium stack players are looking for spots where they're a significant favorite to gamble because they have a comfortable chip position. They're not looking to put all their chips on a simple coin toss. That information should make it clear in your head why it is so unlikely people will be willing to call off when you put them to the ultimate decision for all their chips, and why being a super stack is so valuable. When you're a super stack, even if someone takes a stand and wins the all-in, you still have the chip lead in the tournament, and you can keep chopping away at everyone. You don't have to slow down at all. With fear equity in place, your opponents will allow you to build a big stack, and this is why playing for the title when you have the chip lead is such an effective strategy. When you're implementing this strategy, you do have to pay close attention to the table and be aware of your image. If there's a player who is willing to gamble because they want top spot as well, you may want to tone it down when he's in a good position to play back at you. You don't need to win every pot, and you don't need to win all the chips in the first 15 minutes of the final table. If you have a super weak table, by all means, go after every single pot. But if there are some players who won't stand for your aggressive ways, stay one step ahead and back down when you sense that they're ready to take their shot at you. Not only will you keep your big stack safe, you're going to frustrate the hell out of the other players at the table. If you never give the competent player a shot to take you down, there's really nothing they can do but wait until three-handed or heads up to take their shot at you. Once you've made it to shorthanded play, you're looking at a nice big payday no matter what happens. Congratulations if you've made it this far. Now the whole game changes because A, there are fewer cards in play and thus there will be fewer premium hands. B, the blinds and antes are coming around much more often, so pressure goes up on the shorter stacks. And C, since most of the time nobody's going to have anything strong, it really comes down to taking advantage of game flow and applying pressure in the right spots to pick up the chips. Yes, sadly, you can no longer wait for the goods to put money in the pot, or else you will get run over and blinded out. You're going to have to learn to play some less than premium hands properly if you want to succeed in this stage of the game. So the first thing you want to do is watch how everybody else is adjusting. Everyone is now guaranteed great money, and some players will be content with that and start playing really recklessly. They feel they have nothing to lose, and they're also often very weak shorthanded players, and that will lead to overvaluing a lot of medium strength hands that they're getting and playing poorly. Some players will continue to play the same style they have throughout the final table. A lot of tight players have no idea how to adjust to shorthanded play, and will continue to wait for strong hands hoping they get action. These players will get blinded off, and if everyone is paying attention, which they're usually not, these players won't get the action that they're hoping for when they have a big hand, and therefore won't be able to accumulate any chips. Often, what happens though is the other players, like I said, aren't paying attention, and these tight players still get big action on their strong hands, allowing them to double through to decent chips. So don't be the guy who gives the tight guy action when you have a medium strength hand shorthanded. Other players will still be playing, hoping to move up just a couple more spots before they open up their game. Your approach against these players should be fairly obvious. Steal, 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 steal. Your job at this point is to be the best reader of the game flow, be in tune with what's really going on at the table. You need to make note of what styles people are playing, and use the best counterattacks to keep afloat and chip up. The first thing you want to identify is who is the table captain, if of course it's not you. He should be easy enough to identify. The table captain is the one who's raising the most pots, 3-betting a bunch, and flatting people's raises with the hopes of stealing the pot post-flop. This player is of course very dangerous, but it's also very unlikely that this player has any semblance of a hand when he's in the mix. You want to use his momentum and his action through the other players against him. What I mean by this is your opponents are going to take one of 3 approaches versus the maniacal player, and there is a counter you can use for each of these approaches. You know that this table captain is always going to be in the action, and everyone else has to react to him. And it's up to you to react correctly. If they take the first option of folding and staying out of his way, then the only way to pick up chips at the table is to play back at the table captain and let him know that he should be picking on the other players and not you. Leave my blind alone. If the other three players are being total pushovers and you're the only one putting up resistance, there's a good chance that the captain will leave you alone while focusing his efforts on the nits. This will allow you to maintain chips while everyone else gets blinded away, giving you a great shot at making it to heads-up play. If the other players are reacting to the captain by flat calling a lot, knowing that he has weak hands and they're ahead of his range, then your strategy should be to put the squeeze play on a lot. The initial opener will almost always be folding, since he's opening like 50 to 80% of hands and has a player behind him. And the flat caller will often fold because while the hand he had for flat calling was ahead of the opener's range, odds are it's not a strong enough hand to call a 3-bet, or he would have 3-bet himself. And even if they do call your squeeze play because of pot odds, or they want to speculate, or they want to show that you can't just run them over, they're still usually going to just check fold if they don't hit the flop hard, allowing you to win the pot a good majority of the time. Finally, if the other players are countering the captain by 3-betting a lot, you're just going to have to be 4-betting all in with your strong hands, such as pairs and big aces. You're going to pick up a huge pot anytime your move works, and even when you do get called, you'll usually be flipping for a monster pot that will almost guarantee you a spot in heads-up play should you be lucky enough to take it down. Relative position to the action is extremely important as well. If you are directly on the left of the table captain, you're kind of handcuffed because everyone else is going to act after you have reacted to the table captain. You're in a way forced to reveal the strength of your hand to avoid getting abused by the other players with relative position. Unfortunately, that's just the way it is when you get a table draw like this. When you have bad relative position, you should play straightforward, because if you try to flat wide or 3-bet light, you still have to worry about the other three players reacting to you, who are well aware that you are just trying to play back at the table captain. By paying attention to relative position, you can predict how the action's going to go. For example, if someone flat calls the captain, captain's opens, and someone puts in a squeeze play, you might want to consider flat calling with all your strong hands facing his open, because you can expect that same player is probably going to want to pull a squeeze play when the opportunity comes to him, and then you have a nice spot to back raise all in and win a monster pot. By following the game flow, you can make pretty good guesses at how players will react to your action, and by being one step ahead, you can use their tendencies against them. And the fact is, most poker players are pretty predictable. Once you get in tune with the way they think and the way they like to play, it's pretty easy to pick them apart and just trap the hell out of them. The last point is one I went over when discussing who is controlling the action. Use your absolute position and your relative position whenever possible. In shorthanded play, having some sort of position really is the nuts. At most final tables, you won't be dealing with super creative players, and you should be able to read their actions and predict their reactions pretty well. This is something that comes with experience, but if you practice by playing shorthanded cash games or shorthanded sit-and-goes, you will get very good at this part of the game very fast. The most difficult adjustment for full-ring players to shorthanded play is what constitutes a strong hand. The best way to determine whether you're overvaluing your hand or not is not to think in terms of absolute hand strength, i.e., I have top pair top kicker, or I have the fourth nut flush draw, but by thinking in terms of relative hand strength, i.e., your hand versus your opponent's hand. So, if your opponent puts in a certain amount of action, can you still expect your hand to be stronger than his at showdown? Break the hand down in terms of how many bets are going in. This is something I covered in the 102 course as well, planning a hand and the poker matrix. The flop, turn, and river each count as a bet, and a raise counts as 2 bets. Generally speaking, Top pair is way good if only one bet goes in, often good if two bets go in, based on your kicker of course, and rarely good if three bets go in. Hands such as two pair and sets on dry boards are way good no matter how much action goes in, but if a straight or flush is possible, and your opponent throws a raise in the mix at some point, you want to think about pot controlling with your hand and just calling, possibly even folding to the fourth bet, rather than just stacking off because you flopped a set. Because when your opponent is willing to put four bets in the pot, he probably has that 5-card hand that crushes your set. It's not often that people will run fancy bluffs at this stage of the game, so check raises on the turn and especially check raises on the river should be highly respected and given credit. Likewise, if you have a straight or a flush but it's not the nut straight or flush, you might want to consider only getting 3 bets in the pot. Like if you hold the 7 high flush and your opponent is willing to put 4 bets or 5 bets worth of money in the pot, odds are he's got the bigger flush and you're drawing dead. I've included a tight aggressive hand range so that if it's your first time playing shorthanded, you can at least get a basic idea of what hands you should be opening. So in first position, you're looking to open ace 10 off plus, a queen jack off plus, ace 9 suited plus, 7-8 suited plus, and any pair. On the button, you can go as wide as ace x, 7-8 off plus, jack 9 off plus, queen 9 off plus, 5-4 suited plus, 5-7 suited plus, 10-7 suited plus, and again, any pair. In middle position, so the cutoff, you'd like to do something in between these two ranges. Your considerations for opening the cutoff should be based on who's on the button. If the button is a big nit who's going to fold 90% of the time to your open, then you can go ahead and open with your button opening range. If, however, the button is a loose aggressive who's going to flat call and re-raise you a lot, you should treat the cutoff the same as being under the gun. Now, this is just to give you a general idea and is not the hard and fast rule for shorthanded opening requirements. I just wanted to give you a base, something to start from. If you're the chip leader and people are playing weak, you want to open a much wider range than the one I have here. As the big stack, you can open anything playable from any position, and if nobody is playing back whatsoever, then you can actually just open every single hand from every position until someone starts playing back. If there are reship stacks or aggressive players in the blinds, you would want to open a tighter range than usual and stick to the hands that you are willing to call a 3-bet or 4-bet all in with yourself, because you can expect that those reshippers are going to be pulling the trigger a lot over a loose opener. And if you're the short stack, you'd probably want to open tighter on the button than the hand range I have, because you're committing a good chunk of your chips, and you generally want to have a hand that you can go with if someone re-raises you when you are on the short stack. Unfortunately, shorthanded play is something that would need about 100 PowerPoint slides to really be broken down. So I'm not going to say that this is perfect, but it should give you a reasonably good idea of how to approach shorthanded play, and your instinct and feel should be able to fill in the gaps. Believe me, if you have everything in this slide down pat, you're way ahead of your competition. Finally, we have heads-up play. Again, if you've made it this far, congratulations, you are guaranteed an absolutely huge payday, and you've put yourself in position to, win it all, get the glory, get the title. So, how the hell do we win a heads-up match? Good question. The first thing you want to do is feel out your opponent. In the first 10 hands or so of heads-up play, you should be able to tell if your opponent is going to play a pushover game, a passive game, an aggressive game, or a complete psycho game. Your first clue will be how the player has played throughout the rest of the final table. Most players generally carry their natural style into heads-up play. Most players are very inexperienced in heads-up play, so they don't know how to change their style. So your dream scenario, of course, would be to get heads up with a weak tight fish so that you can just raise every pot, blind him away until he's got nothing left, and then start gambling with him when he has 4 to 6 big blinds. This is why there's a lot of value to targeting the other strong player when it's three-handed, so that when you do get heads up for the biggest pay jump in the tournament, you'll have the best shot at winning the match, rather than a tough, difficult battle ahead. The next thing to look at is how deep the stacks are. If stacks are 20 big blinds or under, there isn't much play left anyway, and you've just got to accept that it's going to be a contest of who runs better. In these cases, when you have a strong hand, meaning a pair, yes, any pair, any ace, or two big face cards, you shouldn't be planning on folding. Raise, call, re-raise all in, whatever you can, just get the money in and run 5 cards. Hope for the best, and if luck's on your side, you're going to take the title. But if it's not, you shouldn't be too disappointed. Second place pays very well in these things. If the stacks are 40 big blinds deep or more, then the feeling out phase is very important, because you want to have a specific game plan that is tailored to your opponent's weaknesses. Heads-up poker is a lot like tennis. If your opponent has a weak backhand, then hit it to his backhand every time. What's he going to do about it? When the stakes are high, people are very afraid to make mistakes, so rather than attempting to adjust and risking something stupid, odds are your opponent is going to just stick with his style and pray for the best. If, on the other hand, your opponent does try adjusting and it's his first time ever being in this situation, there's a good chance he's going to make a major mistake. Position is everything in heads-up play. For the most part, you should be playing all your big pots in position, trying to break even out of position. Be aggressive on the button, and don't feel obligated to play out of position with less than stellar holdings. It's okay to raise every button and fold every big blind. It's a fully valid strategy for heads-up play. The hands you defend from the big blind should be based on how often your opponent is opening the button. Generally speaking, you only want to defend hands that dominate your opponent's opening range, because being out of position is such a big disadvantage. If your opponent plays very weak post-flop, then it's okay to speculate out of position with hands like suited connectors and suited gappers. But against aggressive opponents, you don't really want to let them have control. So if you're going to play a marginal hand out of position, you probably want to be 3-betting it. So that way, even though you don't have position, you will have the aggression going into the flop, which is also extremely valuable. The chip lead is also a huge advantage in heads-up play. When you have more than a 3-to-1 chip lead on your opponent, even if he doubles up, you still have him covered. You can afford to take risks to bust him because you'll always have another chance. You can be fearless and make big moves because worst case scenario, you'll end up even stacked and just get right back to battle. When you have the chip lead, hammer, 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 and force your opponent to pick up a hand or take a stand. You know, it could always happen at the wrong time. If your opponent will just let you chop away at him until he has no big blinds left, then by all means raise every single pot. There are 3 plans of attack you can take to heads-up play. Against a weak tight opponent, a nit, or a tight aggressive opponent who probably doesn't play much heads-up, the hyper-aggressive strategy is the best. With this strategy, you will be raising the button every single time, forcing your opponent to play out of position, which these players are typically not very good at, and a lot of times they're just going to fold and let you pick up the blinds. You'll also be 3-betting most of the time that you defend your big blind, so that no matter what, you always have at least one thing going for you in the hand and going into the flop. You'll either have position, aggression, or both. These players' styles are based on making hands and getting paid. Since it's extremely hard to make anything good heads up, you should be able to run them over. Also, when these players hit a big hand, they'll generally let you know by raising the flop or the turn, allowing you off the hook cheap. The next approach is best suited to the super loose passive players and the calling stations. With the aggressive approach, you still want to be playing in position most of the time, but you should be willing to fold your trashy hands because your opponent's going to call your raise most of the time, and you want to be well ahead, looking to get a lot of value when you hit. Since your opponent will call your raise with a ton of hand, you know, stick to opening again the hands that dominate, the ones that he calls with. So when you do hit top pair big kicker, you can be happy to just get all the money in, expecting it to be a big favorite most of the time. Oh, by the way, something I didn't say about adjusting to heads-up play. Top pair is the nuts, and anything better than top pair is the super nuts. in almost all situations, unless you're about 200 big blinds deep. So, yeah. Just keep that in mind, especially with 40 big blinds. If you flop top pair, heads up, getting it in is totally fine, totally standard. Anyway, these players also have tight opening ranges, so when they raise and you're out of position, you shouldn't be giving them the opportunity to play a raise pot in position. It may seem unfair that they'll always let us play in position by calling our raises and we never return the favor, but poker isn't about being fair and friendly, it's about making money. These players will also limp a lot of buttons and be very transparent post-flop as to whether they hit the flop or not, which will allow you to pick up a lot of uncontested pots with small stabs. With this style, you probably want to be raising about 3x because your opponents are going to be calling anyway, and since you have more value hands, you want to make the pot a little bigger. If you decide to raise it up when they limp on your big blind, you want to make it 4 or 5 times the big blind because they're going to have position, so you want to make them pay as much as possible to be able to see that flop. Finally, we have the passive trapping strategy, which should be used against the loose aggressives and the hyper-aggressive donks. We know that these players love to bet, 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 so our optimal strategy is to hope to hit the flop and call, call, call. You should be defending any hands that can flop top pair good kicker, something like Jack 10 plus. And if you hit that hard, don't plan on folding. Most of the time, these players are just going to barrel off with nothing, so if they wake up with an overpair, it's a cooler. Trust me. You don't want to be 3-betting them since they're rarely going to have hands strong enough to call or 4-bet. So when you wake up with a big pair, take the same approach I just mentioned and call down. Of course, you can throw a raise in when you're highly confident that they have at least second pair and they're willing to go with the hand because you have an overpair. But that all comes down to feel. You can 3-bet them with semi-bluff hands like 7-8 suited and stuff because they're going to barrel you off anyway if you just flat call, so you might as well take the lead with hands that potentially could hit the jackpot and they won't be able to put you on. On the button, start out by raising. If they 3-bet you a lot, try limping a wide range of hands, but if they just call or fold out of position, then raising a strong range of hands is totally fine. Again, I'd like to provide you a general starting hands guideline for heads-up play. If you open the following hands on the button, you will be playing about 50% of your hands. This is a good start, and based on your opponent's style, you can widen, significantly widen, or tighten up your opening range relative to this guideline. When you make it to the last few players of a tournament, there is often an option to chop up the prize pool. If you make a deal, you'll guarantee yourself a payout different than what's listed on the tournament, like, leaderboard or lobby. And the tournament will generally just be finished. Everyone gets whatever's agreed on, and the tournament's done. Usually the spots below first place, like second, third, fourth, fifth, will increase their payout. The lower spots increasing it significantly. And the chip leader will get some amount less than the posted first place prize, but he is locking up a very hefty payday. He is guaranteeing that he's getting the highest payout in the tournament and something close to first place money, so it's not all that bad. If there's a trophy, you can play it out for that, but once the money's out of the picture, all the fear and pressure really dissipate and the game just really isn't the same. The benefit to chopping it is that you take the luck and variance out of the picture. If everyone's really short stacked, there isn't much skill left in the game, and the title's going to go to whoever runs better or picks up the most coolers. When the stakes are super high and you can lock up a good payday, it often makes sense to do so because you never know who's going to be on the wrong side of the next cooler. It could be you. The cons to making a deal are that you give up your edge on the field and your opportunity to win the tournament outright for the maximum payout. Obviously, your edge is dependent on how deep the stacks are and how much play is left, so the blind structure is often the determinant of whether or not chopping it is the best course of action. Before considering a deal, you want to run through a quick checklist to determine whether you want to play it safe or if you're in the mood to gamble. If the money is very meaningful and you can lock up a big payday, you should lean in favor of making a deal. If you are unlikely to ever be here again, then taking the variance out of play is once again a good idea. If, on the other hand, you're an MTT pro and this is just another day and another final table, you might as well play it out because you're a big favorite to have more experience than your opponents in super shorthanded play. So you're the big favorite to take the big payday. If you respect your opponents and their skills, then chopping is a smart move. If you think you are by far the best player and the rest of the field is a bunch of pushovers, then you should never make a deal. Finally, can you sway the deal in your favor? A lot of times in the big payout tourneys, people are so desperate to make a deal because they've turned, $200 into 100,000. They just want to lock up the prize, and they're willing to do some stupid things just to make that a sure thing. If everyone else wants to talk business, and you're the only one not cooperating, ask them to give you some amount more money, whatever number you think is fair. If you're getting 30,000, ask for 4,000 more. See what they say. You promise them that if they give you what you're asking for, then you'll make the deal. And first place is often getting so much money, he'll say, okay, fine, I'll give the guy 2,000. Second place, you give him 1,500, and third, you give him 500. We can make this deal. We'll finish this thing. I've seen short stacks ask for 30% more than they were supposed to get and receive it because the big stacks were just so desperate to lock up the money. Likewise, if you're the chip leader, you can definitely ask for more than what you're entitled to by claiming you're a big favorite to win anyway, so why would you want to give up any money to the lower places? There are no hard and fast rules for making deals at the final table, but if you're a good salesman, you can definitely make deals that give you way more equity than you deserve, and in those cases, you should definitely lean towards chopping it up. To calculate the correct or fair amount of money everyone should be awarded in a chip chop is fairly easy. And if math really isn't your thing, if you check out the resources page on grips.com, we have a link to an iPhone app that will do the chip chop for you and make life easy. So first, guarantee everyone last place money. So if there are 3 players left, everyone gets third place money. Take that money out of the prize pool and add up the money that's remaining. Next, determine what percentage of the chips in play each player holds. That percent lines up with what percentage of the remaining prize pool they should receive on top of their guaranteed last place money. So everyone gets third place money, then you chop up the remaining money and add it to what they're getting for third place anyway. The chip leader will receive the most, and the low stack will receive the least, but the short stacks will always get more than they would have if they busted out and take third place, for our example, because they're getting third place plus some chip chop money, not just third place money. Finally, you can decide to keep money in play for the winner. Instead of using all the remaining money left in play, you could take out a fixed amount and then do your percentage of chips calculation with, again, what's left in the prize pool. Everyone will have a guaranteed payout, but there will still be some extra money given to the eventual winner. This helps protect the integrity of the game, but also, if you're the chip leader, can work heavily in your favor. If negotiated properly, you can set it that by leaving the right amount of money in the middle, you can still win first place money if you take down the tournament, while guaranteeing yourself a huge payday if you get knocked out in any other position. You're the chip leader, so when you cut a deal, you're guaranteed the highest payout between all the players. But you can leave enough in the middle so that if you get first place, you get that additional money, which on top of your guaranteed payout equals what first place paid out anyway. It takes some skill, but when people are desperate to make deals and the money at stake is huge, it can be done. I hope you enjoyed this lengthy part of my MTT guide. I know the importance of final tables, and with all this info, you should too. This has been Evan Jarvis for Tower Gaming. See you.